There is a deep affection between children and animals, and we hate them for it. This is a quote from The Art of Reanimal, and it perfectly sets the tone for Tarsier Studios' latest game. This new world is a desolate, bleak place, just as the story told within it. Humans locked in an eternal war, slowly destroying the world around them. Animals twisting and mutating into monsters beyond recognition. Children left to fend for themselves, turning to desperate measures to stay alive. In many ways, this new adventure shares the DNA of its predecessor, Little Nightmares, but in many more, Reanimal is a very different beast. In April of 2017, Swedish game studio Tarsier Studios released Little Nightmares. It wasn't their first game, but it would go on to become their most popular. It was a perfect blend of cute and creepy, a game with an almost toy box art style, if that toy box was found inside Tim Burton's basement. But more than the art style, the thing that stood out about Little Nightmares was the narrative. This was a game that showed you a story, it didn't tell you one. The entire game contained no single line of dialogue aside from some gibberish you could hear on TVs and such. This meant that every plot point, every moment was left up to your interpretation. Who was this mysterious lady that you dreamt of at the start of the game? Why did you wake up inside a suitcase? Why do the chefs wear masks over their true faces? The game asked many such questions but never truly gave you any answers. Everything was left for you to decide. But the game wasn't purely abstract. There were the bones of a story that the devs laid out for you, or more accurately, there was a theme. Little Nightmares 1 was originally going to be called Hunger. Between Bandai Namco becoming the publisher for the game, and Hunger Game being a terrible search term, Hunger was renamed Little Nightmares. But that original theme of hunger was baked into the core design of the game. Most of the enemies in the game that seemed desperate to catch you ended up eating you if they did. Everything in this game revolved around hunger in one way or another. The children at the start of the game were starving, the guests were hungry but in a greedy, gluttonous type of way. The shadowy lady who ran the place chose not to eat to remain thin. She was hungry by choice, and the character you play as had a mysterious building hunger that grew throughout the game. This game that was open to interpretation but built on a foundation with a single solidifying theme proved to be a big hit. In February of 2021, the sequel to this game was released, Little Nightmares 2. Well, technically this was a prequel, but we'd find that out later. This time the game introduced a new character, Mono, and this time there were two children trying to survive in this horrifying world. At time of release, we didn't know that this second character was Six, the girl in the yellow raincoat from the first game. This entire game served as a prequel to that first story. It explains how Six ended up on the moor, where the mysterious Shadow Six character came from, and why Six was affected by the hunger. Well, explained might be a bit of a stretch, but it did give us more clues. This time, the main theme of the game was escapism. People were so desperate to escape their mundane, monotonous lives that they became obsessed with the images they saw on their TVs. This obsession was what led them being taken by the Signal, a dark power that emanated from the signal tower. Of course, the big twist of Little Nightmares 2 is that the main antagonist, the Thin Man, is actually Mono grown up. The entire Pale City is trapped in a time loop or a broken timeline. Mono grows up to become a monster after he was betrayed by his one friend, and the cycle begins anew. This is about as simply as I can explain these two games, but both conveyed their messages through environmental storytelling, a show-don't-tell methodology, and a narrative that was completely open to your interpretation. But despite both of these games being very well received and earning a hardcore, albeit niche fanbase, it was later announced that Tarsier Studios wouldn't be returning to develop the third game. Supermassive Games, the developers behind several horror titles, would take on that responsibility, and Tarsier Studios would move on to develop a brand new IP, a new game set in a new world with a new narrative. This time, the game would be called Reanimal. Reanimal released on the 13th of February 2026. Of course, Tarsier of all studios would release their new horror game on Friday the 13th. Reanimal was once again a story about children surviving in a cruel, horrifying world, but it seemed like this time the horror was turned up even higher than before. Although upsetting to some Little Nightmares content creators and fans, much of the discourse about Reanimal up to its release was just how much more this game felt like Little Nightmares than Little Nightmares 3 did. Despite using many reused assets, Little Nightmares 3 to a lot of people didn't feel the same. The dark and dreary locations of Little Nightmares 1 and 2 had been replaced with bright, sunny, oversaturated ones. The enemies that once threw themselves to their death to try and catch you now lumbered around as if they didn't care you existed. But perhaps most disappointingly of all, there was no singular theme that unified the game like there was for the first two. Little Nightmares 1 was hunger, Little Nightmares 2 was escapism, so what is the theme of Little Nightmares 3? Boredom? I guess in that case they nailed it. But Reanimal not only had that signature bleakness to it, in fact this time it seemed even more dark and gloomy than ever, but this new game absolutely had a core theme: war, or more accurately, conflict. Just like Little Nightmares 1 and 2 before it, almost everything in Reanimal can be traced back to that core principle. There is of course a literal war in the game, faceless soldiers fighting in trenches, but the effects of war can be found in almost every corner of this new world. The landscape is slowly transforming, trees being cut down to fuel the war machine or being destroyed because of it, wildlife losing their homes, birds becoming slick with oil, livestock being left to fend for themselves, their humans having left long ago to fight. Cities are left mostly empty and abandoned. Those left behind are blind to what is really happening in the world around them, with only propaganda to guide them. Children orphaned, left to fend for themselves while their homes lay in ruins. This core theme binds the narrative together once again, and while Reanimal this time does have dialogue, it's rare, fleeting, and often incredibly vague. Once again, Reanimal is a game that invites you to come up with your own interpretation. The bones of the story are there, but what they mean are left up to you. But despite being set in a brand new world, the fundamental DNA of Little Nightmares still exists within Reanimal. Around the world you can find portraits. This was something Little Nightmares did a lot. These portraits were often cut content, concept art, or artworks of characters and locations you would see in the game. They were often placed seemingly at random, and their only job seemed to be to flesh out the world. They often showed characters that made little to no sense, and they made you wonder if the world had always been this way, or if these portraits were twisted and warped versions of something once normal. Once again, we see those portraits in Reanimal. They might not be quite as common, but they have the same effect. Characters that shouldn't possibly exist, that often make no sense, are captured in pictures for us to gaze at. Like everything else, these pictures often fit into that core theme of the game. This portrait shows someone who has lost most of their head. It doesn't take a YouTube theorist to work out that this person was likely a casualty of war. The hole in the back of their skull was likely made by a bullet, which would explain the lack of their face. But like many things in this world, how they managed to stay alive is the real mystery. Many of these portraits share a very similar style to characters and portraits we could find in Little Nightmares. This makes sense, it's the same studio with many of the same artists. But that weird, haunting, just not quite right style is what Tarsier are known for. These designs are so captivating because they perfectly lie somewhere between human and monster. These creatures might seem horrifying to us, but perhaps in this world this is just what everyone looks like. Perhaps normal here is very subjective. Many of these creatures are so fascinating because they behave, in many ways, like us. They have jobs with titles. This man is known as Principal. Just like the chefs from the first game, he has a role that he plays within this world. Even Sniffer, the beast-like creature that pursues you in the early parts of the game, was shown in early concept art to be a musician. These human-like designs put these characters in the Uncanny Valley category. That is the specific area between not quite human enough to look truly human, but also not robotic or beastly enough to look like anything else. They're just human enough to look unsettling. But not only that, it makes us question whether this world was always like this, or whether the calamities that befell it made it this way. More than just sharing similarities with Little Nightmares 1 and 2, in some ways I think Reanimal is the type of game Tarsier always wanted to make. Indeed, looking back at what Little Nightmares was originally going to be before Bandai Namco got involved, there seems to be a pattern that Tarsier Studios might just have given us a big clue to. The pig really is the mascot of Reanimal. Despite the character itself not being in the game for all that long, pigs show up everywhere both in and out of the game. The very first teaser for Reanimal showed this pig, with its guts hanging out and its ability to talk, both setting the tone and the mystery of the game in one small appearance. The statue in the collector's edition is of the pig, despite the sheep beast being much more unique and arguably iconic. We have artwork of both Hood and Bucket interacting with pigs in different ways, and if you look closely throughout the game, you can find dozens of little nods to pigs, drawings in the school, even wallpaper featuring a pig. So if the big pig creature was only in the game for such a brief amount of time, why is the pig such a symbol throughout the game? Well, I think there is both an in-game lore reason for this, but also possibly a real-world reason for this too. In the game, there are hints that terrible things started happening to this world before the flood. In fact, the true ending of the game reveals that the children were the ones that caused the flood in the first place, but long before then, disaster started to affect this world. In many of the newspapers you can find around the game, you can find the headline that's in English. This stands out in contrast to the gibberish language Tarsier usually uses. This headline reads, "Pig laming spreads across the land." Lameness in animals can happen due to a number of reasons, but it's usually localized to small areas due to things like poor living conditions or poor food quality. The fact that it was happening all across this country likely meant that there was something more to it. This is even more interesting when you consider that someone seemed to be investigating pigs for one reason or another. We can find a pig head surrounded by pictures of both pigs and humans alongside cameras. I think Tarsier are subtly telling us what happened to the people of this world, at least some of them. The humans that ate those same livestock began to change as well. These bloated humans we can find throughout the game are themselves slowly turning lame. At one point we can even see them being held in pens just like pigs. I guess it's true what they say, you really are what you eat. But this weird phenomenon isn't the only one. Just as these humans are becoming more animalistic, some of the animals are themselves becoming more human. As the sheep beast eats humans, it itself becomes more human. Once again, you are what you eat. In a weird way, the roles here between animals and humans are being reversed. Then there is the fact that things in this world that should have died long ago somehow survive. I think this is subtly hinted at by the soldiers. Many of them have twisted faces, as if this isn't the first time they have turned their guns on themselves. The children all have coffins, which shows ways that they die, despite seeming to still be alive now. And the girl, after being sacrificed by her friends, reanimates and continues her journey as we see in the game. But the first clues of all these disasters were first found in pigs. This is not the first time that Tarsier Studios have tried to add a pig into their games. There was a pig character and a portrait of a pig found in Little Nightmares 1, and in the Little Nightmares 2 concept art, we find a pig that has very similar characteristics to the one we find in Reanimal. Now this next part is just a theory. I have nothing to confirm any of this, and most of it is pure speculation, so take what I'm about to say with a big pinch of salt. But it seems to me like the common denominator here is Bandai Namco. Tarsier wanted to add a pig into both Little Nightmares games, but were for some reason unable to do so. Then, suddenly, the pig is made front and center for their first game away from that old publisher. If you look at what Hunger was originally going to be and then compare it to Little Nightmares, there was a definite loss of darkness. As much as I do love Little Nightmares to death, I still wonder what that game would have looked like if it was closer to Tarsier's original vision. But now, Reanimal in many ways is much darker and much more risky than even Little Nightmares 1 and 2. But to make this even more apparent, Little Nightmares 3, still being published by Bandai Namco, who own the rights, was almost completely sanitized. I know for a fact that Supermassive Games are not shy when it comes to horror. Love them or hate them, you cannot deny that their previous games have proved that they have no problem showing dark themes. So why then was Little Nightmares 3 so sterile? We will probably never know, but my personal theory is that Bandai Namco were the ones pushing for the game to appeal to a wider audience, After all, horror is a niche genre, and many publishers have tried to break out of the restrictions that brings and push into the mainstream. If Bandai Namco were the ones that were holding Tarsier back from creating the true horror experience they wanted, removing things that could be seen as too disgusting or too shocking, then making the very thing they were told they couldn't do front and center for their new game might have been a statement of rebellion. Or perhaps they were just enjoying the freedom that they had now been given. But just as Little Nightmares was very different from what was originally conceived, Reanimal 2 had a similar transformation. The developer's vision for this new game was once very different. With every video game, there is an original vision and then an end product. I doubt there is a single game in existence where those two things are exactly the same. Sometimes games have complete and radical shifts during production, but more often games change over the course of their development and things are changed or lost along the way. This is certainly true for Reanimal, and we see plenty of examples of this from the trailers. There are many sections from the various trailers that never made it into the full game. Whether this content was cut completely or whether it was moved into the upcoming DLCs is yet to be revealed. But the biggest evidence we have for this is from the official art book. The art of Reanimal, which is found in the collector's edition of the game, shows that there were a lot of ideas that never made it into the final product. As the book openly states, sometimes ideas just can't find a home, but the core sentiment of the game remains unchanged. That is not entirely surprising, since this game was built on a core theme like Tarsier's previous games. Yes, the theme of war, but also the theme of the relationship between children and animals. But some of this cut content is a real shame, since it further explores many themes and ideas that the full game only hints towards. This relationship between children and animals is something that was much more obvious in early concepts. We can find a fox in the game that was supposed to play a much bigger role. This was something I pointed out from the demo. There is a moment that a fox stops to look at the children very early on in the game. This fox, like many other animals in the game, isn't quite right. This one should have died long ago. Its lower half is entirely missing, possibly a hint that it was run over on the road nearby. But this moment is accompanied by a very ominous piece of music, hinting that this character meant more to this story. As we see in the artwork, the children were indeed supposed to meet this character again, but they were supposed to meet many more beasts too. We can see that hounds were originally supposed to be included in their own area, the doghouse, something that mirrors Sniffer's own tie to dogs as well. At one point, an undead-looking horse was considered. This is the second character we see ride an animal, and I wonder if this was originally going to be a gameplay mechanic. But it's not just animals that were cut. We see a policeman riding a tricycle. This seems to be an idea that was changed for the trailers to be the person with the upside-down head, which would then be changed again to be Sniffer. Principal has portraits in several areas of the game and in the art book, but is nowhere to be found. There was a character known as Fisherman, which would have tied in pretty well with the whales we find in the game. There was someone known as Food Lady. This seems to be the second lunch lady type character cut from Tarsier's games, although this one being called Food Lady might have been a cheeky hint as to why she had lost her legs. There was even a character known as the Dane that had several iterations as either a lumberjack or a Pied Piper type character. His influence seemed to have carried over into the game as we see the results of his handiwork. All of these things do make me wonder just how alive this game could have felt. The first few areas of the game felt bleak, desolate, and devoid of life. All that is left here now is Sniffer and shadows of what was. While there is of course a certain charm to that loneliness, I do wonder what the game could have looked like if all these characters were still roaming around the world. Once again, Reanimal could have been a very different beast. So we've looked into where Reanimal came from and what it could have been, but what is Reanimal? What does it all mean? Well, I have my own personal answer to that question, and then I have the real answer to that question. At least one of them is probably going to disappoint you. As I alluded to earlier, Reanimal has a heavy theme of war, but this isn't the only core theme of the game. It's true that many of the dangers you face throughout the game are a result of the conflict that is still raging on in the later chapters. But another big danger in this world are the animals. I made reference earlier to what I think is one of Reanimal's big secret messages, that animals and humans are closer than we think. We've already seen that humans and animals seem to be switching places. Animals are becoming more like humans, and humans are becoming more like animals. It seems like this change was gradual, and it also seems like this change is tied to the reason why both animals and humans don't die as easily as they should. This change was first noticed in pigs, which is why the big pig we see has been stapled together. It also seems like humans were at one point investigating these strange events. Not only do we have evidence that someone was investigating the pigs, but it seems like the soldiers were taking notice too. In a secret room towards the end of the game, you can find a horse strapped to an MRI machine. It seems like someone was scanning the horse's brain activity, but considering the horse was not strapped down, the horse was likely already dead when it was being scanned. So the soldiers likely knew that animals were beginning to reanimate. Animals that would die would return to life as if nothing had happened, although it seems like this process is tied to what causes them to grow and mutate. But I think the game gives us some huge clues to what caused all of this in the first place. One thing that I found strange is that the large and twisted animals all have one thing in common. When you are being chased by the pelican, you probably didn't notice that it's dripping with oil. This could be a commentary on how oil spills can affect the wildlife around the area. But this oil is also found when the girl gives birth to the sheep beast. Along with coughing up the sheep, the girl coughs up a large amount of this same black substance. This gets even more interesting when you unlock the true ending. After being sacrificed, the girl lay at the bottom of the well before being reanimated, but the small creatures we see approach her also appear to be made of oil. It's implied that these creatures are the reason why the girl comes back to life, and since the mutated animals we see also contain this oily substance, I'm willing to bet that this is the cause of all of these strange events. I think this is how it all connects back to war. Oil comes from deep beneath the earth. The process to extract it is often destructive to the environment around it. Oil is essentially the remains of what once was living organisms, but in order to continue this war, the two sides would need more and more oil. Oil to power their war machines that are used to destroy the environment even more. I think digging up all this oil is what led to uncovering this mysterious living oil that caused all of this calamity. Humanity doomed themselves by fighting so much that they slowly destroyed the planet around them. This destruction of the environment led to unearthing the very thing that would accelerate their own downfall. This perfectly mirrors the story of the children. The blood ritual sacrifice that they carry out was likely done in desperation. Perhaps they hoped to end the war, or maybe this was their attempt at fixing the strange incidents happening to the livestock. Maybe they thought this would save the animals. Perhaps these children were already dead, and they hoped this was a way to return to the normal world. But in doing so, they too doomed themselves. The flood was created from this very sin, and this was what eventually created the sheep that would devour them all. But I think there is even a good argument that this whole event has been a response to all of the destruction of the planet. In one of the secret rooms where you can find a coffin, you can find dozens of giant shells. This bunker looks identical to the one you can find right near the start of the game, implying that these giant munitions are stored under the ground all over the country. If used, these shells would cause massive devastation to the planet. Just like the children, this seems like a desperate last resort. It's possible that the planet, its soul, or a god, or maybe just Mother Nature herself, decided to fight back against those that were harming her. In a way, the planet, also desperate for a solution, waged war on the ones waging war on her. This cycle of violence could be a nod to the idea of an eye for an eye. The phrase, which is often shortened, states that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. It's supposed to be a cautionary tale that revenge only begets more revenge. I think the whale was a big clue to this. We quite literally took an eye from the seahorse and gave it to the whale. An eye for an eye. I think the ultimate moral of this story is that it doesn't matter who started this conflict. What matters is the damage it causes to those left behind. This core theme of war and conflict is contrasted with the theme of innocence. Children and animals are both supposed to be innocent. Perhaps this explains the bond that they share. But in this twisted world, many things are reversed. The children and animals of this world are slowly becoming more monstrous than the soldiers, perhaps a cautionary tale of how war can rob them of their innocence. Now, this is my own personal interpretation of Reanimal's story, but I also promised you I would explain what the real interpretation is. The fact is, and this might be disappointing to hear, but there is no real interpretation. Once again, Tarsier have created the story in such a way that you are supposed to come up with your own interpretation. If you think my theory is wrong and that all of this is just a dream, then that's valid. In a world where people flock to YouTube in order for people to explain the stories of games to them rather than figure it out themselves, Reanimal stands in direct contrast. It's designed specifically so that there are no concrete answers. The game asks the questions and expects you, the player, to answer them. The next time you see a Reanimal explained video, just remember that is only their interpretation of the story. Not that there is anything wrong with that kind of content. Plenty of people enjoy listening to games be explained. That's a fact that I have certainly used to my own advantage over the years. But unlike the vast majority of games out there that can be explained before you move on to the next one, Reanimal will stick with you for much longer. Every time you replay the game, you will see something you missed last time. You might come up with a whole new theory that's completely different to the one you imagined before. The beauty of an interpretive narrative is that you can never truly solve the riddle. It will always be there in the back of your mind, always ready to haunt you one more time. Perhaps this is why people still like to theorize over Little Nightmares almost a decade later. In a world of quick fixes, dwindling attention spans, and instant gratification, Reanimal demands more of you. Unlike most other games that people now consume as quickly as possible before moving on to the next, Reanimal cannot be digested so quickly. I'm sure we will still be talking about Reanimal years later. As I've said, it truly is a different beast. This video was very different to what I usually make. I've been trying some new things on this channel lately, and I would genuinely love to hear what you thought about this one. Did you enjoy this deep dive, and would you like to see more of them? Or would you prefer I keep the videos smaller and more manageable? Please let me know in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, then fire a shell at that like button, or conscript yourself now if you haven't already. Notifications also help sift through the YouTube propaganda and make sure you are kept up to date with my latest content. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.